As you are aware, tomorrow we celebrate Labor Day. Am I alone in thinking it strange that we celebrate Labor Day by taking the day off from work? I mean, seriously, if we really wanted to extol the virtues of labor, wouldn't it make more sense to work a 12-hour day and not take a lunch break? I mean, that would say something about work, wouldn't it? I think so. Go all out. I'm not really pushing for that kind of schedule, believe me. But as we all know, work has its benefits as well as its challenges. And as we all know, however good work may be for us, we can have too much of a good thing. The Lord knew this too. That's why in the command we read a few moments ago, rest is as much a part of the commandment as the working. For emphasis, let's read it again. It's not that long. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servants, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the seventh day, the Sabbath day, and consecrated it. Clearly, the Lord commanded a balance between work and rest, didn't he? He also created a boundary, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. Generally speaking, those countries with Jewish and Christian influence adhered to the call for a Sabbath day. They did, that is, until the Industrial Revolution introduced factories. Factories with machines could manufacture goods in far greater quantity and with greater efficiency than an individual tradesman. And as a result, a great pool of working men and women was required. Those who owned or managed factories looked for laborers, and often they found them in children. Workers were drawn to the cities from the streets of the slums, from the poor, failing farms, and from distant shores as immigrants flocked to America. And tragically, the desire for profit pushed owners and managers to ignore the biblical command and drive their workers to the limits of their endurance and sometimes even beyond. With only the biblical mandate for a Sabbath and the command reinforced by Jesus to treat one another as we ourselves would wish to be treated, it was convenient for them to separate religious fervor and practice from business. And they came to say, it's business, as though somehow or another that justified their behavior. Business is business, they insisted. And without legal limits governing what they could do, they required laborers to work 12 hours a day, 6, sometimes 7 days a week in poorly lighted, poorly ventilated, sometimes poorly constructed factories. And to work alongside machinery that was dangerous in its construction and without any kind of safety features included. And all this for meager wages. In 1879, a woman in New York City working as a dressmaker earned between 33 and 55 cents a day, not an hour, per day. Of course, a pound of butter cost only 24 cents. Coffee was 15 cents a pound, and eggs were 18 cents per dozen. Still, how many of us would be willing to work a half a day for enough money to buy a pound of butter, which this past week sold at Walmart for $4.98? Well, some of you may think you work for cheap wages, but we work for more than that, don't we? It's no surprise that such low pay and such horrible working conditions led workers to create labor unions, and on June 28, 1894, President Grover Cleveland signed legislation making the first Monday in September a national holiday called Labor Day. Now, I'm not speaking in support of nor opposition to labor unions in our current times, but given the circumstances I have mentioned, they were necessary to ensure fair treatment for workers. Currently, the balance of work and rest is being contested by the United Auto Workers Union, which thinks a 4-day week of 32 hours and 3 days rest is a better target. And who am I to argue? Maybe you agree. Now, when contracts expire on September 14th, they may strike to try to achieve that more attractive balance, that 4-day work week, 3-day off week. So taking a step back, we have on the one hand the biblical mandate, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, and rest on the 7th day. And on the other hand, we have workers being treated so oppressively that they organized labor unions. And I suppose we should also add that third option. Labor unions are saying, hey, let's redefine the balance. Instead of 6 days and 1 day, 4 days and 3 days. Or how about 1 day and 6 days? That sounds good, doesn't it? Well, my point is there has to be a balance between labor and rest. God knew this, even in the beginning. Labor unions know this as well. So, what themes might we draw? First, why would God have said we are to labor 6 days? Here's the obvious reason, in my way of thinking, of course. If we don't work, we don't eat. St. Paul reinforces this notion in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. Some Christians were convinced that Jesus' return was going to happen imminently. So soon, in fact, that they decided to quit working altogether and just sit down and wait. Paul takes a dim view of this attitude and says, if they don't work, neither shall they eat. That's pretty clear. So work is good because it enables us to live. By working, we can buy food and provide housing and clothing and all the necessities of life. But work is also good because it provides a kind of dignity. It lends a dignity to a human being. Our work gives us a sense of purpose and accomplishment, which in turn provides satisfaction. Sometimes we don't realize how important this is until we are deprived of a job. Genesis records that even in the very beginning, God gave Adam a job, tending the garden. Apparently, it was a job without pay, but nevertheless, it was his assignment, and he found satisfaction and purpose in the job God gave him. Work and employment are not necessarily the same thing, are they? Often, and usually even, they are, but not necessarily the same. Now, I'm going to quote President Biden, who says he is quoting from his father. Now, I do this with some reservation because I don't want to get accused of being political, okay? I have political opinions, just as you do, which I might be willing to share in private conversation, but as the next election looms on the horizon, I will never, from the pulpit, support or favor one political candidate over another. That said, see if you don't agree with what Mr. Biden, the elder, is quoted as saying. He said, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. Though our work, through our work, we not only support our families, but we make a contribution to our community, our society, our culture. John D. Rockefeller once said, I believe in the dignity of labor, whether with head or hand, that the world owes no man a living, but that it owes every man an opportunity to make a living. This was brought home to me in a personal way some time ago when Connie and I helped a homeless man and his children get an apartment and find a job washing dishes at Cracker Barrel. He was making $9 an hour at the time, not enough after taxes to pay his monthly rent and to buy food for his family, even if he worked 40 hours a week, which he didn't because Cracker Barrel, along with a lot of other employers, have found a practice of hiring people for less than full-time so they don't have to pay benefits. Well, that's between Cracker Barrel and the Lord, I suppose, but many businesses do this. They hire workers so they don't have to pay the benefits. Still, this man was so proud of having a job, but what touched me most was the pride his little boys took in their daddy having a job at Cracker Barrel. That was for them a big deal. Daddy having a job. Work brings dignity. It is a way of affirming, I'm taking care of my family. I'm making a contribution to society. Well, if work brings dignity, why is it so many of us are not satisfied with our job? London's media company, the Daily Mail, conducted a study and discovered that 11:17 a.m. on Monday is the most depressing minute of the week. Aren't you glad you came this morning to learn that? The most depressing minute of the week. The rationale for that was that by that time on Monday morning, the work week has begun in earnest. The worker has gotten down to the business at hand, the daily grind, if you will, and the whole week stretches out before him or her. I suggest that there may be another reason as well. Instead of resting over the weekend, instead of taking a Sabbath, as God knows we human beings need, they crammed their Saturday and Sunday so full that they got up Monday morning already exhausted. Does that sound familiar? It happens, doesn't it? It's interesting and enlightening to observe that out of his concern for our well-being, God requires a balance. Work is essential, but so is rest. We live in a culture that values work. We even speak of a work ethic. We extol the virtues of working hard, long hours, taking little time off. We describe a workaholic as if addiction to work is a good thing. Imagine what frowns we would get if we described ourselves as restaholics. I'm willing to try if you are. Our minds need to disengage from tasks. We need rest. God knows that we need to work, but we also need to rest. We need to disengage from those things that keep us focused through the week. And goodness knows our bodies need a time of inactivity to repair themselves after a week of vigorous labor. I close as I began. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female servant, your livestock or alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But the seventh day he rested. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated